Hello, and welcome to FranklinCovey on Leadership. I'm your host, Will Hodling, FranklinCovey's head of product. In these conversations, we speak with world leaders and leadership experts on the mistakes, mindsets, and methods that help them become the people they are today. We hope that their hard-earned insights help accelerate you on your own leadership journey. Today's guest is Nancy Duarte, one of the world experts in public presentations, storytelling, data, and design. Nancy is the founder and CEO of Duarte Inc., a leading public presentation and storytelling consultancy. She's worked with many of the world's greatest companies and leaders to hone their crafts and message. In addition to her coaching and consulting work, Nancy is also the author of 6 best-selling books on storytelling, presentations, data, and design. Nancy, welcome to FranklinCovey on Leadership. Nancy Duarte, welcome to FranklinCovey on Leadership. So excited for our conversation today.
I am too. Well, I'm excited to be here.
Lovely. So at risk of being a little bit too Oprah out the gate, I want to start with a conversation and question about your motivation for the work that you do. I find that oftentimes our career goals and aspirations are driven by experiences that we had growing up. So would love to hear a little bit more about your upbringing and what motivates you to do the work you do today.
That's an amazing question. You know, I have one photograph of myself as a little kid that my mom took, which is also part of my growing up. And I was sitting cross-legged on the floor, and I had a towel, and I found objects around the house, and I was arranging, and I would tell a story, then I would rearrange it and tell a story, and arrange it again and tell a story. And so that's kind of what slides are, right? You put things on a surface and you arrange and rearrange them. But it was also part of my childhood. I was in an economically and emotionally starved environment as a kid, with all the things that come with that, the abuse, the neglect, all of that. And as a way of escape, I think sometimes the way you play is also the way that you can find your career. And as a little kid, I found this abandoned desk, and I was only 10 or 12. I would escape into the future and imagine myself as this executive. And I had this desk, I put it in and I would file papers, and I would trace pictures, and I would put them in alphabetical, different taxonomy orders in my drawer. And so I think this way of me feeling present or feeling full, this way I played actually became what I became. So it's kind of fun. I love that question. Thank you for asking. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing, and for the vulnerability on sharing some of the highs and lows of the upbringing, what drove you to where you are today. So fast forward, we'll go in the Wikipedia entry from early childhood into early professional life. So what led you to become a communications expert and coach? So you said as a kid you were interested in becoming an executive, and then what moved you into executive presence and storytelling?
Yeah, I love this question. So what happened was we were the very first person, one of the very first people we knew who bought a Mac in a 2-mile radius. I think we were the only people that had one.
And who is we?
My husband and myself. Yeah. Okay. So he bought this Mac, and I'm like, this is dumb. Can't build a business out of this. This is dumb. And sure enough, I was like very pregnant and very frustrated. I'm like, look, if you can start a business, if I can sell it, it's a thing. If I can't sell this, you're going to go get yourself a real job, dude. And sure enough, I picked up the phone, and we won contracts at NASA, at Tandem, which is now HP, and at Apple. So we won contracts in one afternoon. And so we had to run to the library and learn what graphic design was. We had to go and learn how to use this newfangled thing. And what happened is, in winning Apple, a lot of people don't realize that Apple was the first company to project to a screen from a computer. Traditionally, they'd been like 35 millimeter slides. And so we were doing their big developers conference. We were doing all their keynotes. We just became their slide vendor because there was no one else to do this work on a Mac. We were so early with our purchase of this computer, and we just had to jump in and learn it. And then what happened, believe it or not, in 1993, Apple had a very significant layoff. That was when Steve had left and all that. And all of my Apple clients, most of them, they left and went to other Silicon Valley companies. And so we became renowned as a presentation company. And that was how the word spread across the valley and ultimately the world. And so I always loved presenting, Will, but I feel like I had a scarlet letter get over because in college I made a C- in speech communication and a D in English, and that was, now I write books in English about speech communications and about communicating, and that was because I didn't have empathy. I wasn't coming with content that the students would be interested in. I was way doing obscure presentations, and so what happened was. That became a motivating driver for me to completely change who I am. And I always loved presenting. I loved being in front of a crowd. And I just had a lot of tenacity and a lot of willpower to kind of make a way here in the Silicon Valley, because we love presentations here. They matter. I mean, we're one of the driving forces that help make presentations matter because of the work we do. And that includes not just the slides, but the story and how well you deliver it, how well your presence is, and how well you're credible.
What was your original pitch? I mean, those are 3 unbelievable clients to get out the gate for a new firm. What was the pitch that was so compelling?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So what had happened, you're such a wee pup, such a young child, you probably don't know this. But back in the day, people literally, to make a bar chart, for example, they would take an X-Acto knife and black electrical tape, and they would put the Y-axes, the X-axes, rub on letters. It was very manual. And so I just was like, hey, we have we were like the young, like tech upstart, weirdly, because we're like, we have this thing called a computer, and I would mock up what our charts could look like and tell them how quickly we could do it, and we won. And part of it was my husband was a technical illustrator at the time, and so we would photograph the back of these computers, and he could, as realistic as Mac Paint could get, he could draw the back planes of some of these mainframes and stuff like that, and people were just like, what the heck? And so, that was it. I was like, I jumped in from a very analog and manual solution into, hey, we could do this faster and better. But they had to buy into how like pixelated the fonts were, but they didn't care. It was NASA. I mean, they didn't care, and it was Apple. They made the thing, so they didn't care that the font was pixelated. We were giving back to them. We pushed back to Apple and Adobe and other of my really early clients. We pushed it as far as that tool could go, and then we would adapt when there would be advancements in the tool. So yeah, it was fun.
So you brought up Apple and the work that you did with them, and it's been a wonderfully mutually symbiotic relationship. You helped build them to what they are, and in many ways they helped build Duarte to what it is as well. I'd be fascinated to hear if there's any speeches or keynotes of Steve Jobs that have really stuck with you to this day, and what about that speech was so impactful for you?
I love this question. We've loved working with Apple. In fact, Steve used to call us the Mozart of keynote. I loved it. And I think that the one I analyzed the most was his iPhone speech. It's in my TED Talk, and I cover that. So if people want to see it, they can go to my TED Talk. But one of the most profound things he did was that I loved is I covered this particular part of this speech in my book Illuminate, which is about using stories, epic length stories, to drive change. And he did this really remarkable thing is he had to create a movement. When he re-entered Apple, he had to convert all of the developers. They had to scrap all the code they'd written in macOS 9. And they had to rebuild everything from scratch to move to macOS 10. And so there were skeptics, right? Apple had been through a lot, and Steve had been gone, and now he's back. He had all these skeptics. And he kept telling me, hey, you got to move over to macOS 10. And there were a couple of pretty significant companies that were still holding out. And there was this one developers conference where he got up on the stage, and literally a coffin comes up from out of the ground, and smoke is going like crazy. The screen changes to stained glass, and eerie music plays. And Steve comes out with a box, big old box of macOS 9. The coffin opens, he puts it in the coffin, he shuts the coffin, and he puts a rose on the coffin. And he literally eulogized the death of macOS 9. And one thing about being a leader that's so powerful is we need to recognize when people need something of the past to end definitively so they can move forward. And this concept of endings and beginnings was really powerful for him, right? Like he stood up with a 2x2 grid and said, everything that doesn't fit in this grid is going to end. He was so good at that. And then the developers didn't move on. And he's like, and I think so many people think of him as the speech maker, but he was also a movement maker. And he could tell when there was friction and he wasn't getting the right kind of traction towards something that really needed to move forward. And so that ability for him to do that, I think, was one of his big superpowers.
The visual I haven't seen, but the visual of the coffin coming up on stage. He was such a master showman. I can imagine it now. It's incredible.
Yeah.
You also worked with Al Gore on producing An Inconvenient Truth, and Al Gore, great politician, obviously, and now climate crusader. That movie won Oscar for Best Documentary. It catapulted climate into national conversation. But he doesn't have the natural showmanship, the natural extroversion, or what charisma maybe of a Steve Jobs. So how did you work with Al Gore to create such an impactful presentation?
Yeah, it was great. He had joined the board at Apple, and board members can't benefit from a company that they work on the board for. So Apple's team threw him over to us, which was so fun. They're like, hey, well, you guys got to work with him. And I think a lot of people noticed the gap between how he presented as a political figure juxtaposed to how he would present climate change. And I think what people forget is that when he went on the journey of the soul and he came off the boat and he had the big beard and the media kind of attacked him, he went on a journey of the soul and he came back from that being like, you know what, I'm going to dust off my 35 millimeter slides that I used to run around with in the 70s, and I'm going to do what I love. So part of it, not that being a politician isn't passionate, but part of it is he tapped back into something deep. And that's what we teach in our presence and in our speaker coaching courses, is you got to tap into your passion. So that's one thing that happened naturally for him. But just was passionate, off the charts passionate. The other thing that's very interesting people don't realize is he had traveled the world and delivered that for almost 5 years before the movie. So he'd already done it in front of a live audience, and he knew what made people laugh. He knew what made people stick. He knew what questions asked him, and he knew all of that information, and he delivered it really well. And he really sharpened the delivery during that 5 years and really nailed it. So by the time it was turned into a movie, he had been nailing it now for so long. Now, what happened by him going across the country for 5 years and planting these seeds, when the movie came out, it became almost like a flashpoint for a movement that was already burgeoning under the surface because of this groundwork that he laid by traveling the country and delivering it at really high stakes universities, or he would tap in obviously to the ultra wealthy communities. And so he had already built this groundswell, and then the movie kind of popped it open.
Those are two amazing success stories, obviously working with Apple, working on An Inconvenient Truth. What about an instance, and obviously you're not going to name names, but what about an instance of a time where you worked on coaching, storytelling, and it didn't work out? And what did you learn from that experience?
Oh, it's a really good question. I think that my teams, when it doesn't work, it's because the customer doesn't want to put the work in. So you can stay a good presenter, but I think every CEO, every leader today has to be able to know how to own a room. And so the only times we see it not work is when the leader doesn't want to put the time into doing the story well and delivering it in a way that's amazing. So you would think as the presentation lady and the communications guru, I even have coaches. I have a coach that if my own internal talks or one external one is high stakes, my coaches commingle being able to coach on the content and coach on the delivery. So no matter how accomplished you think you are, I highly recommend that when it's really high stakes, you actually go and get a coach. And don't even dream that you're good enough. Because especially today, with AI and fake images and stuff, coming across sincere and truthful and vulnerable is going to win in this era of AI. Is this very human version of yourself is going to win.
Yeah. And you've now been consulting with companies for decades. Yeah. Do you think that great storytelling, great speaking is more important than it used to be? Is it less important now that we have so many different mediums to express our communication and express our ideas?
Yeah, I could parse the word story a bit. So a lot of our own process includes story frameworks, story patterns, things from story. But then there's also this concept of a story itself, right? This anecdote, this way of and what a story does. And because I host story nights, and I just hosted some of the most powerful people were just at my dinner table last week. And,
Wow.
and this one dude, he's like, cries 3 times. And so I'm like, say goodbye. I'm like, bye, Tom. And I was like, I just adore men that'll cry like that. And he goes, Nancy, I don't cry. He goes, I only cry when I come to your house. He goes, something about story and setting us up to be vulnerable. He goes, it transforms me. It changes me. And that's that effervescence. Now that happened at my dinner table, but a brand can create that sense of longing and like, I want to be different, or I want to buy your product. And I think when it's done well and it's not contrived, it can be powerful. And every leader needs to tell stories using either story frameworks and story methods, or literally going there and telling actual stories of failure. Like, leaders sometimes want to get up and say, I have it all together, but a leader will stand up and say, you know what? I tried this once. I failed heroically on a different time clock. I'm not going to fail for you because I know this road. I've traveled this road before and I know all the pitfalls. That goes so far, Will. It just goes incredibly far. And so embracing the actual effervescent version of story is, I think that's, ChatGPT does not know your personal story and it cannot tell it in an effervescent way. So
Totally.
yeah, I think it's going to make a big difference.
It's a great point. So I'd love to move from talking about some of the leaders that you have worked with in consulting to now these frameworks that you reference. So you've been able to scale your impact by moving from consulting and coaching to writing. You've written 6 books about presentations, about storytelling, about design and data, and all of them are bestsellers. So enormous congratulations.
Thank you.
You have coined your own method, the Duarte method. I feel like that's a real sign of success when you have the method named after yourself. So congratulations. You have arrived on the main stage.
It's named after the company.
Named after the company. Maybe just share with listeners, what is the Duarte method?
Yeah, the method itself is kind of broad reaching, and it covers everything from the story itself to the visualization of the story to the delivery of it. But the core part is everything's based in empathy. And the way we define empathy, like everything is empathy first. I even built software. It's like empathy first presentation building or empathy first communication. And the way we define empathy is I know myself. And I understand who I am. And then I spend an enormous amount of time understanding you. So it's know yourself, accept yourself, understand others, and then adapt yourself to them. So that's the trick, that's the gift, is how do I need to show up differently because I'm going to sit in a room with you? And how do I adapt to you? And you need to do that at scale with audiences. So first thing we always do is we're like, who are you talking to? What do they need? What is their pain? And so the method is based in empathy, powered by story, and tangential to that in the delivery section. We have like deep listening IP, which falls under delivery. Like when you're one-to-one, how you deliver, you got to map. You got to be the kind of listener someone else needs you to be. And so it's all about mapping almost away from who you are naturally toward what the audience needs you to become. And that is the method, that little engine of empathy first.
I want to hear about how you applied that method in your own work. So you gave a TED Talk, the secret structure of great talks. Very meta, and it was a huge hit. You have millions of people around the world have viewed it. How, going into that, knowing that you're going to have however many, 500 people in the room, but then hundreds of thousands, millions of more online, how did you develop the empathy with your audience for that speech?
Yeah, I knew it was super high stakes. I worked with TED. That's another one of, I think, a cool feather in our cap. And I'd worked with them enough to know that if I really nailed the TEDx talk, they could put it up on the TED.com website. And so I pretended as if it was the TED stage. And man, it took a lot. And one of the phrases that's very famous, for some reason I can't think of the guy who said it, is, murder your darlings, which means just because I was affectionate toward a turn of phrase or whatever, I let other people help me shape it. And I rehearsed that. I rehearsed rehearsed it for 35 hours. So it doesn't even count how much time I had. I rehearsed it, and one of my content people would be like, trim that. And then I had another gal that was like, okay, shave 6 seconds off from here and add that 6 seconds here because you didn't unpack that. And that part was, and it was literally like that surgically. So I'm delivering it and I'm like, blah, 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 and they'll give you the hook. Like they will walk on stage and give you the hook. And so, man, I could see that person get up out of their seat and they're right. And I took a bow and I looked up and I was at 17 minutes and 56 seconds and I nailed it, right? But getting it wired like that took an incredible amount of trimming, shaping, visualizing, and then the delivery was just all of it. It was the whole method all bundled into one. And finding that pattern, just, I took a trip through Story for about 3.5 years as a CEO. I carved out my mornings for 3-4 hours every morning, and it works. I mean, it works. These process work. And it was fun to do that. I loved it.
Yeah. So the anchor to that talk, for those of you who haven't seen it before, the anchor to the talk is this concept of the sparkline. Mm-hmm. In less than 17 minutes and 56 seconds, if you could give the sparkline summary, the spark notes on the sparkline to these listeners, that would be great.
Yeah, so I took a trip through all the greatest speeches, through Steve Jobs, Dr. King, and I found a pattern, and it's a pattern of contrast. So if you think about Story, there's this rise of tension and a fall of it. That's what we call an arc. It's actually this rising of tension and the cathartic release of it. And I could tell that speeches had this rhythm or this cadence to them, and I wanted to find what that was. And so what it is all through a really great presentation, you will use the gap between what is and what could be, and the return to what is and what could be as a pattern. And so the spark line actually looks like, pumpkin teeth, jack-o'-lantern teeth. So picture a line and it shoots up and it goes across and comes down. So it's for a sequence over time, you state what is and then you jump to what could be. After you undulate a few times, whatever's most appropriate for your content, you end with a call to action, but you don't stop there. You add a new bliss. And what a new bliss is it's this dream in your mind of what your idea is going to look like becoming materialized, right? It's this, the future is now going to look like this with this product adopted. But it can't just be about the product adopted. It has to be about how is humankind going to flourish with this idea put out there. And it's an amazing way to end anything because it gives hope. It gives a lot of, it fuels a lot of emotional fuel that people need when they're following a leader.
The sparkline, when you gave that TED Talk, did you diagram your own sparkline of the talk? And do you suggest people literally chart it out as they're going through their presentations?
Yeah. And I've had other people, because they were going to call the bluff, right? And they sparklined it out and they're like, oh, okay, well, she did it. But what's interesting is the sparkline didn't exist when Dr. King or Steve Jobs were around, right? It was something I had to discover. So if you craft a talk and you work it and it's like perfect, high probability it followed the sparkline, right? So you can use it as an analysis tool. When I analyzed Steve Jobs, I'm very analog. It was almost a 45-foot long piece of graph paper with 1/4-inch squares on it. I mean, I literally word by word, phrase by phrase, paragraph by paragraph, analyzed the whole thing. And so then that's when I came up with the visualization method. And so I found it through historically great works. And anyone who goes through our courses loves it. Like you could use it as an analysis tool for sure.
With 35 hours of preparation, how did you come off as spontaneous and improvised? I feel like that's one tension in giving presentations is being too rehearsed, too prepared, too memorized, and then you feel you come off as a little bit less approachable and personable. So how do you balance preparation and kind of spontaneity and connection to an audience?
Yeah, and that's the trick is so many times people come across like an automaton, like they've got it memorized or they're reading it from the teleprompter. And I think the big thing is that you have to actually feel your passion. And then you can hear people speak from their head and you can hear them speak kind of from their gut and kind of from this other place. And that's one thing. But the other thing is you could rehearse until you know it. And then some people think, oh, and then I have to rehearse till I memorize it or rehearse. And it's not that. It's that you have to get to a place where you can present it from a place of conviction. And that takes, like, if getting it 90% there, Will, is like 4 hours or 2, getting it to where you can present it well in a natural way from a place of conviction was the rest of the 30 hours. Like, it literally, when it's high stakes, like our annual meeting, because that makes or breaks our kickoff. We do a Duarte kickoff every January. We put the time in, and that's an internal event. But if we do that well, it gives us traction all year, right? So there's moments where we put in, a lot of hours into presentations when it's really high stakes.
Yeah. You've moved as a company from coaching directly to more broad training. You referenced a moment ago, if you take our course, you'll learn about this framework, et cetera. Yeah. What is the hardest part about transforming presentation abilities and skills when you're not able to work directly with someone? What's uniquely challenging about the more training course format?
Yeah, it's interesting. So what we do is we still have a thriving consultancy. And when we solve a big problem in the industry and it's unilateral across it, then the consultancy, we take it, we shape it into training. So it's real world, right? Real world pain. And the training's interesting because what's happened is we've already kind of done it at scale. So we know it's going to work. And I think the difference is in the practicum. So people can learn the concepts, they can learn how to do it right. And it's really up to the leader to enforce it. So what's really kind of sad is we'll have people come through, they get all fired up. They're like, oh my God, this is the right way. They see it in their own career. We have people come through who will be at a manager level, and then they'll be like, I got to VP in 4 years because you taught me how to communicate, right? But they applied it themselves. So one of the things that happens is sometimes learners will come through, they get all fired up. They drop right back into their culture that doesn't believe in empathy. It doesn't believe in story. It doesn't believe in these things. And they're like, oh my God, I'm frustrated. I can't transform my whole company. And so, and sometimes they have to move on because they're like, I'm going to move on and I'm going to adopt these principles. And there was even a quote in the New York Times that said one guy made $700 million more because they applied the method, which is crazy, right?
Yeah.
And so move on.
I'm hoping you got like a 10% fee of that or something.
What? I got a quote in the New York Times, which was maybe worth more. But I do think that it is a lot about really believing it works and really applying it yourself. And so when learners can do that, it's just unbelievable. And like you, working on how do you take it to large enterprises at scale so it sticks. So we have all kinds we're building a whole community around it. We've got a whole lot of things in the pipeline I'm excited about to get it to stick so you can rehearse, so a human and or AI can vet your slides. So we've got a kind of a bifurcation of different ways that we're planning to scale it, which is exciting.
Yeah. Speaking of AI, as you think about the future of Duarte, how does AI impact what you do? What maybe excites you most about AI and what makes you most nervous?
Yeah, what excites me the most is its ability it feels like putting on a jetpack sometimes, right? It can get you somewhere faster. We are building software, which is fun, and we are folding AI into all of our learning programs, all of our workshops. And so what I'm finding is the method as an instruction set on top of an LLM is really powerful. Unquestionable that it works, which has been really fun to see. So that fires me up. I actually have my exec team running the company for about the last year, and I get to just play in this AI sandbox. And I think any company that doesn't have the CEO in a front row seat or even driving the car in this era of AI is going to fail. It'll be too late, or they'll be left behind, or the competitors. So important to be hands-on. Yeah, some scrappy little vibe coder will, pass you up. And so I'm excited about it. I'm cautiously excited. I do think it's going to impact jobs. And that's also one of the reasons, I think it's such a blessing that we are in the business of human connection, because AI, you can't be presented to by a robot and the robot's eyes won't dilate when they see you because their brain is, focused on you and they're having a passionate moment with you. That won't happen with a robot. And so I think we're in the right business, and I'm excited about that. And I'm excited that we are a leader in AI. But I also do believe it is going to be a struggle for jobs. We're already seeing it. Graduates are having a hard time even getting software development jobs. And so I think our ability to scale is going to be amazing. But critical thinking, creative thinking is going to atrophy. And that's why I really think that people need to be doubling down on not leaning so hard on the models to do their thinking.
So now I'd love to move to a lightning round. We'll ask a series of quick questions before we go to kind of our official closer. So my first question is, what is a great speech you recommend our audience go and listen to?
I would say you should Google Scott Harrison, Charity Water, and every speech he makes is amazing, and he's featured in every one of my books.
Amazing. Second is, who is a speaker that you wish you could say was a client of yours because you're so impressed with the way they present ideas?
I would love that to be Richard Branson.
What is a controversial design idea or maybe a font that you secretly like?
Calibri, I loved it. And all of the email default used to be Calibri.
Calibri. Great.
Yeah.
What is a common mistake that a lot of speakers make that you wish you could coach everyone out of?
I wish I could coach people to have empathy. If I had a moment where I could wave my hand and the scales fell off people's eyes, it would be an empathy superpower that I want them to have.
Lovely. And then finally, what is an example of a book or potentially a movie or a show that you think does an amazing job of storytelling?
The Office.
The Office. Okay, great. An always enjoyable one. I feel like on all my Delta flights, I tap back into the archives.
K-dramas. I think Korean dramas are masterful, but I'll just
those
say
two.
Office
Great.
For fun, just for fun.
Perfect. All right. Well, our traditional closing question we ask all of our guests. FranklinCovey, as you know, is a leadership company. And so who is a leader that has had an enormous influence on you, and what lessons can we all learn from them?
Oh, I love this question. So the leader I think about every day is Jesus. So I know that sounds kind of lofty, but whether you believe in him or not, he led a sustaining movement, right? So he's doing something right because it took time to connect himself to what matters. And I think what we could learn is, first is humility, right? So as leaders, we have followers. He had followers, and he would wash their feet. Like, that's very humble and demonstrated that he puts humans as a priority in a really humble way. The other thing I think we don't talk about in business a lot is forgiveness. So I think in these companies where we need to fail fast and people are going to make mistakes, he had people betray him and still showed up with forgiveness, and I think that could actually accelerate innovation, weirdly. And then the other thing is like meekness, which is a little bit different to me than humility, where meekness is, you have these tools as a leader, and leaders have tools like a tool belt. Like, we have multiple tools or we wouldn't be leading. And sometimes I whip out the wrong tool, and next thing you know, I've decapitated someone accidentally or whatever, right? We're so quick with our little tools. And someone told me once, meekness means you have this array of tools, or dare I say weapons, or, tools, craftsmanship tools. And meekness means you have the tools, but you keep your weapons in their sheath, right? And as leaders, what that means to me is you give space for other people to become great and live in their greatness. And you're not constantly just whipping out, oh, I know, and here's the answer. Meekness is you know the answers, but you let other people discover them themselves. And I think about this a lot, and I would say those are the lessons. And I loved that question.
Well, humility, meekness, forgiveness are three powerful lessons to end on. So Nancy, thank you so much for taking the time to share your hard-earned insights with our audience. It's been fascinating to learn more about your own journey, becoming the leader and the speaker that you are, the lessons that you've learned along the way working with so many great companies. And we really appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Will.
Absolutely. And to our audience, thank you so much for listening. We hope you join us next week for another episode of FranklinCovey on Leadership. Have a great week.